Sit and shut your eyes. Imagine for a moment the howling of churning wind, the pressure from the G-forces rushing blood away from your head, and the monstrous roar of an engine 10 times your weight, wet. Devotion puts the audience in the cockpit, and with historical accuracy as the wingman, we'll see how long the movie stays aloft. This is Devotion, Fact versus Fiction. Look for a film about flying, and you will fail to find one that wouldn't show real aircraft on screen. Being the son of a Navy aviator himself, the director, J.D. Dillard, was sure to honor the memory of Jesse L. Brown and his story by tracking down as many real aircraft from the Korean War as he could. And to use his own words, according to an Entertainment Weekly interview, quote, finding 80-year-old planes that are still in working order, that can withstand the sort of stress that we're going to put them through, was certainly a task. What does this mean for the movie's realism? The toiling task to trek through the tumultuous world of decommissioned planes is not without its many spoils. One of which is that Devotion has been given just that extra edge over other period pieces like it, with having the luxury to be able to show the physical specimens involved in the reality of the history on the silver screen to gawk and awe at. This leads us nicely to the devotion-driven star himself, Jonathan Majors. Beyond seeking his very own pilot license, Majors adorned Brown's jacket and flight suit beautifully with the elegance and poise he often brings to roles, which is another point in the accuracy category for this cinematic retelling. Dillard wanted to tell Brown's story as faithfully as he could, and that means leaving behind the favored tropes and shorthands that Hollywood exploits to cause tension. In life, Brown was supported by fellow naval members, and well respected amongst its ranks. Not to say that he didn't face his fair share of vile acts, all too common to those trying to be treated equal. Unfortunately, few, if any, can escape that unscathed. What makes Major's portrayal worth listing is the very complex nature of Brown as a man, who saw himself equal amongst his peers, in spite of what others may want to see him as. He was not defined by the racism that plagued him, so Devotion refused to be defined by it. Focusing on the interpersonal story between Brown and Hudner, Devotion is what Green Book could have been. It would be disastrously dishonest to leave the real horrors of being black in America behind the retelling, though, especially when the main character helped the desegregation of the military as a whole. And, as stated before, Dillard saw the work of adapting the true story very seriously, so he wasn't going to just make up an event to show that Brown was, in fact, discriminated against. Why sow seeds of fiction when reality feeds just as much with less? Brown, in life, would think up and remember the horrible things people have said and done to him because of the color of his skin. And the biography says he would repeat them to himself in the mirror to desensitize himself in a manner of speaking, meaning he wouldn't be rattled if someone were to try. Bringing us to the truly depressing thought of what was in that book that didn't make it onto screen. Brown would not wear such trauma so openly on his sleeve, making Majors' heart-wrenching mirror scene more grounded in real life than intense drama for the sake of it. Going knee-deep in the swamps of fact versus fiction can be a troubled predicament when alligators hide themselves amongst the logs. That may have been too Florida for you, my apologies. What I mean is that sometimes things are true at first, but in reality are just fool's gold. In this case, it is Dame Elizabeth Taylor sunbathing on the coast of Nice, France. Played by Serinda Swan, the movie moves the trio's meeting up and over a few hours. In reality, it was a group of Marines who found her sunbathing, not our brotherly pair. Brown did meet her on the same day, just hours later at a cafe. Hudner, on the other hand, would have to wait a whole 4 more days before he meets his ever-loving Pearl Slaghoople. The casino scene is mostly accurate, only that Brown probably wasn't there at all, the first sign of turbulence on an otherwise smooth flight. Hope you kept your seatbelts buckled because it's about to get bumpier. Like you probably remember, Brown was most likely missing from that night in the casino, which means he never met the Marines at all. Or if he did, it was insignificant enough not to be mentioned in the biography that this movie was based on. There was, in a matter of speaking, a rather ugly interaction when Hudner stood up for his friend. It was just not as spectacular. If memories are correct, it revolved around Brown being refused service by the waiter and Hudner suggesting they leave. Still notable of him, just not an all-out brawl like we usually like to see on screen. Making the whole casino scene a bit far-fetched at the cost of accuracy wasn't necessarily a bad choice. In the movie's defense, these were very stoic people in life, but that does not make the blood-pumping action any less fabricated. Daisy Pearl Nix was a standout role all of her own. one perfectly played by the wonderful Christina Jackson. The real relationship between Daisy and Jesse was almost exactly what you saw in the movies. They met in high school and had to get married in secret. See, there's this rule that stops people in the middle of their training to get married. Why? Well, who can say? The predatory relationship the military has over the relationships of those in service could fill a book larger and drier than a farewell to arms. But not all is so grim and deflating. Their chemistry in the movie is but a pale imitation for the real devotion. See what I did there? This couple had for one another, to the point that Jesse's very last words were a message of love for her. Moving forward with more accuracies in the home life, born Pamela Brown, December 1949, Pamela had fought hard her entire life to keep her father's legacy alive. Now Pamela Brown Knight, she still carries the torch for her father she lost all too soon. I sincerely apologize for misleading you earlier, because in all honesty, there is something blatantly wrong with Jesse and Daisy's relationship. The movie takes notes from reality, sure, but it takes some liberties with how Hudner actually meets the couple as a whole. See, unlike the movie, Hudner never got to have that dinner with the two lovebirds. The closest Daisy and Hudner got to one another was when he saw her say goodbye to Jesse, and that's about it. They wouldn't have had that conversation, let alone dinner, until 4 months after Jesse's death, when he was awarded the Medal of Honor from President Truman. The very same ceremony where Jesse L. Brown was given the Distinguished Flying Cross and a Purple Heart. He will one day, in a way, be able to accept them in person. What if I told you the entire movie was wrong about the fundamental reason Brown joined the Navy? What would you say if I told you he originally had no interest in piloting and wanted to stay on his father's farm? Well, none of that is the case, so you can breathe now. But it would be hilariously hard not to capture how much Brown dreamed of the sky. Devotion does this dutifully by keeping its origin pretty much unchanged. Growing up, his father took him to an air show at the ripe old age of 6 years old, where he stated he would be a pilot. Imagine knowing, for a fact, no questions asked, at the age of 6, what you were going to devote the rest of your life to. He really did want to fly in World War II, but missed it by a few years. Not to worry, if there's one thing we Americans know, it's war, and that's very sad. Yes, I know, it should be pretty obvious, but you never know who is watching the movie from afar at a drive-in movie with a radio from the 80s. Jesse L. Brown was the Navy's first African-American pilot, and that's nothing to scoff at. The Civil Rights Act wouldn't be for another 10 years, and Brown versus Board of Education wasn't ruled on until 3 years after his tragic death. He was a trailblazer on the same scale of Eugene Bullard, the first African-American military pilot, and Charles B. Hall, the first African-American to be awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. There's something to be said about the relative ease in which the military desegregated in relation to the rest of the country. Often left behind in tradition, the military surprisingly led the way of people of color and minorities as a whole to have any sort of upward economic momentum at the time, where every other institution failed to even treat them as people. The cherry on top of this very complex bittersweet sundae, there's a Knox-class frigate named after him. Decommissioned in 1994, the USS Jesse L. Brown lasted 22 years afloat, and 72 years after his death, his memory is still being told and encapsulated once more by devotion. This wouldn't be a movie about close friends if there wasn't some sort of falling out near the second act so that their bond could be further proven in the third. But you should give Devotion the benefit of the doubt in that case. Not only is it rather small, the real friendship between the two men was often rocky, like any relationship would be in the middle of an active war. The real-life Brown and Hudner often butted heads, and this could sometimes be the result of men living in two different, if parallel, worlds. But the hardest of iron is smelted in the hottest of furnaces. The movie clearly shows the lengths these two men will go for one another, and that could not be closer to the truth of the story. Well, that's not exactly the case. See, the movie is actually extremely close to the real deal. Fact-checking set pieces is devilish. What are usually just meant to be decor that gives us, the audience, a feel for the world we are being transported into, can be a movie critic's playground. Whether it be a car that won't be out for another year, or a poster that has the name of a real actor on it, we are all dying to catch a movie on a technicality. Unfortunately, Devotion passes once more with medical-like precision we've come to expect by now. Joking, of course, the movie's just really good. If you will turn your attention to the serial number on Hudner's Hudner's Corsair. Shouldn't be a big deal just to put anything on there. Lesser movies would take the liberty to put something random like A113 or something. But here, the production team go through the trouble of giving the real serial number of the Corsair the real Hudner flew. Even the helicopter at the end bears the number the real helicopter sent to save Brown. On that note, did you think it was weird that Jesse had such an issue with the Corsairs? By all accounts, the protagonist can't actually struggle as something? No more jokes, I promise. You should know by now that this comes from the real issues people had with the aptly named Widowmaker's F4Us. Also, Jesse really did warm up enough to fly out like the badass he is. Maybe not as cinematically as the movie, admittedly. The large engines made it difficult for pilots to see, so it begs the question. If he had been in anything besides the Widowmaker, could he have survived to the end? We'll cover that whole event later, but you should mull over it until then. Indiana Jones, Spaceballs, Top Gun, Wonder Woman, Devotion, and Top Gun 2. What do all these seemingly unrelated movies have in common? Pilots in leather jackets, of course. Also, just because someone is going to say it, Indiana Jones was not piloting the plane in the first movie. But Harrison Ford is a pilot, and they're basically the same thing. Where would a movie pilot be if he didn't have his trusty leather jacket? Well, Devotion gets it pretty spot on, because the men were not allowed to wear the jacket off of the base. Meaning not many people got to see Jesse in his snazzy featherly hide number. Unless we're counting everyone who has seen the movie, that is. We fans at times can be so engrossed in our favorite media that we forget to keep up with the real world around us. So if you have had your head buried in books or motionlessly watching movies, I'll give you a quick political background. There exists two Korea, North and South. Just after World War II, the peninsula was split by the occupying forces of American and Soviet troops, until the North Korean military, run by dictator Kim Il-sung, invaded in order to reunite it. As you can probably guess, it didn't work. But that's what starts the Korean War. That insultingly simple explanation aside, the two sides are far from friendly, and the North is particularly miffed at the rest of the world. So it's understanding why the movie fails to accurately portray the setting. The military scenes that are supposedly at the Chinese-Korean border are in fact filmed in Washington and Georgia. We didn't think it was too wise to fly an ex-military plane in the very place that tried to shoot them down originally. But an inaccuracy is an inaccuracy, so it must be added to the list. Rounding out this list is a group of not-so-fun truths and falsehoods in the movie. We'll start with the thing I've been dancing around since the start of this video. Flying over enemy territory in his F4U, Jesse was shot down and crashed in the snow as you saw in the movie. He struggles to get free as the movie depicts. Like in the movie, Hudner really did risk his own life to try to save his friend. The scene played out roughly exactly the same way as it did all those years ago. Acting almost off of instinct, he effectively belly-plopped his plane to the ground. In action under any other circumstance or context would have court-martialed the pilot, but just imagine having to leave your best friend and partner in the bitter cold, knowing had things been just a little different, it could have been you. Nothing can really capture the true terror and anguish that it brings. Yet, Devotion does its hardest to illustrate that scene with as much care as they can to convey such emotion. The last thing the movie changed about the story was when the rescue mission took place. In reality, Hudner landed and tried to save Brown far earlier than in the movie. He had to fight to get people to help save Jesse, but the macabre realization that the leg was stuck and that Brown was succumbing to his injuries happened before it got dark out. Jesse's last words, pleading Hudner to tell his wife he loved her, happened in the sunlight. Knowing that makes his passing a little more comforting. He was with his friend in the sun, but all things must come to an end. The rescue party had to leave as it got dark, because the area wouldn't be safe in the dark of night. And with such a sad death, the real-life Jesse had to have a burial worth of Valhalla itself. Because he crashed so far into unsafe territory, retrieval of his body was unfortunately out of the question. Despite this, they honored Jesse's death as best as they could under the circumstances. Dropping a napalm over the crash site, the whole squadron reportedly gave the Lord's Prayer over the radio. Hudner's bold actions saving Jesse won him a Medal of Honor amongst other awards, a medal that the movie literally uses. That's right, the medal pinned to Glenn Powell is the exact same one given to the real Tom Hudner 71 years ago. An extremely valuable, irreplaceable, truly historical stamp of approval of sorts. Maybe that's why the movie had a $90 million budget, just the insurance for the medal. Jesse L. Brown lived a life of firsts. First in his class of mathematics, first African American in the air under the naval insignia, and finally the first African American death in the Korean War. It's never good to be the first blood though. It means there will be more after that. In this case, a lot more. So many young men wounded and dead. The story of talent in the military all too often ends in death and despair. But we can look to Brown's legacy as an example of just how someone can break through the mold, so to speak. And that will do it for today. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the video, and maybe learned a thing or two along the way. If you were keeping track, then you already know that the movie has far more accurate scenes than not. And that's all thanks to talent both on and off the screen. And that's it for us. Have a wonderful day. You're important, you're loved, and you're valuable in this world. Thanks for watching.